A chill swept through the desolate plains of Cedar Creek, Texas, as Virgil Thomas squinted at the last crumbling piece of cornbread in his weathered hands, knowing it was all that stood between his daughter and hunger for the night. The year was 1878, and the drought had been as unforgiving as the creditors threatening to take his struggling ranch. "Pa, is that for me?" 6-year-old Sarah looked up at him with eyes that reminded him too much of her mother, gone 3 winters now to the consumption that had swept through their small community. "Half for you, little bird, and half for me." Virgil carefully broke the cornbread, giving the larger portion to his daughter despite the hollow ache in his own stomach. The small cabin that had once rung with his wife's laughter now felt cavernous in its silence, save for the occasional giggle of his daughter or the creak of the worn floorboards beneath his boots. At 32, Virgil had begun to fear he'd spend the rest of his days in this solitude, watching his once promising ranch wither alongside his dreams. 20 acres, 10 scrawny cattle, and a well that was drawing lower with each passing day weren't much to show for a decade of backbreaking work. "Tomorrow will be better," he promised Sarah, the words as much for himself as for her. "We'll ride into town and see if Mr. Garrison needs help at the general store." Sarah nodded solemnly, chewing her small piece of cornbread slowly to make it last. "Will Mama be watching us from heaven when our luck changes?" Virgil swallowed hard, patting her head with a calloused hand. "Every step of the way, little bird, every step of the way." The morning brought no miracles, just the same unyielding sun that had baked the earth for months. Virgil hitched their old mare, Penny, to the wagon and helped Sarah onto the wooden seat. "Hold tight," he instructed, clicking his tongue to set Penny into motion. The 7 miles to Cedar Creek stretched before them like a dusty promise. They'd made it halfway when Virgil spotted something unusual on the horizon, a covered wagon listing dangerously to one side, a broken wheel evident even from a distance. As they drew closer, he could make out a woman and 2 children standing beside the disabled vehicle, looking forlorn and desperate in the harsh Texas sun. Something in the woman's determined posture, despite her obvious distress, made Virgil pull Penny to a stop. "Looks like folks in trouble," he murmured to Sarah. "We ought to see if we can help." The woman turned as their wagon approached. Her face was streaked with dust, her dark blonde hair escaping from a once neat bun, but her eyes, a striking hazel, were clear and direct as she assessed the approaching strangers. "Good morning," Virgil called, tipping his hat. "Seems like you've had some misfortune." "That's one way to put it," she replied, her voice carrying a slight Eastern accent. "My wheel shattered about an hour ago. We were heading to Petaluma to meet my brother, but it seems we might be camping here instead." She gestured to the 2 children beside her, a boy of about 10 and a girl who looked to be 8. "I'm Nora Abbott," she continued. "These are my children, James and Elizabeth." Virgil introduced himself and Sarah, then climbed down to examine the broken wheel. "This isn't something that can be fixed on the trail," he said after a thorough inspection. "But Cedar Creek isn't far. I could take you there," or he hesitated, an idea forming that surprised even him. "My ranch is closer. You could rest there while I fetch the wheelwright from town." Nora Abbott studied him for a long moment, clearly weighing her options. Her children looked exhausted and thirsty. "You're very kind, Mr. Thomas. If it's truly no imposition, we'd be grateful for the shelter." "No imposition at all," Virgil assured her, though his mind raced ahead to the bare cupboards and sparse accommodations that awaited them. "We can transfer your necessities to my wagon and secure your belongings here until we can return." As they worked to transfer the most important items, Virgil learned that Nora was a widow of 2 years. Her husband had been a shopkeeper in Philadelphia who had died unexpectedly, leaving her with debts and few options. Her brother had written about opportunities in California, promising her a place to stay while she established herself. "I've never lived outside the city," she admitted as they set off toward Virgil's ranch. But James and Elizabeth deserve a fresh start, somewhere with open skies and possibilities. Virgil nodded, understanding the pull of new horizons all too well. He'd come west himself after the war, seeking a place where the nightmares of Gettysburg might finally recede. When they arrived at his small ranch, Virgil felt a flush of embarrassment at the modest cabin and sparse surroundings. But Nora and her children showed no disappointment, expressing gratitude for the shelter. "It's not much," Virgil said apologetically as he showed them inside. "It's a home," Nora replied simply. "That's no small thing." While the children explored the small yard with Sarah as their eager guide, Nora insisted on helping Virgil prepare something to eat. Opening a basket from her wagon, she revealed bread, dried apples, and a jar of preserves. "Please let me contribute," she said when he protested. "You've been more than generous." As they worked side by side in his small kitchen, Virgil found himself studying her when she wasn't looking. There was something compelling about the way she moved with purpose, her hands capable and sure despite the lingering refinement in her speech and manner. "Your daughter is lovely," Nora commented as they watched the children through the window. "She has your determination in her eyes." "And her mother's spirit," Virgil added softly. "Mary died of tuberculosis 3 years ago." Nora's eyes softened with understanding. "It leaves a hollow that never quite fills, doesn't it, though the children help." Their shared meal was simple but felt abundant compared to recent days. The cabin seemed to breathe differently with other voices filling it, the children's chatter, Nora's gentle laughter at Sarah's stories. After they ate, Virgil prepared to ride into town for the wheelwright. "We'll be fine here," Nora assured him, "and I promise we won't be a burden for long." When Virgil returned with the wheelwright, Mr. Peterson, the news wasn't good. The specialist would need several days to craft a replacement wheel sturdy enough for their journey. "You're welcome to stay," Virgil offered, ignoring the voice in his head that reminded him of his dwindling supplies and the work that needed doing. "It's not ideal, but actually," Nora interrupted, "perhaps we could make an arrangement. You need help with the ranch work, and I need a temporary place for my children. I'm a capable cook and can tend gardens and animals. Let me earn our keep while we wait." Virgil was taken aback by her directness but found himself agreeing. "That seems fair, Mrs. Abbott." "Please call me Nora," she said with a small smile. The next morning, Virgil awoke to the unfamiliar scent of coffee and baking bread. He'd given Nora and Elizabeth his bedroom, while he and James slept in the main room. Sarah had been delighted to share her small room with another girl. In the kitchen, he found Nora already dressed and working, her sleeves rolled up as she kneaded dough with flour-dusted hands. "You didn't have to start so early," he said. "Old habits," she replied, "and I wanted to prove my usefulness right away." Over a breakfast more substantial than anything he'd had in months, Nora had supplemented their stores with more items from her wagon. Virgil outlined the day's work. The vegetable garden needed weeding, the chickens required tending, and he needed to mend fences on the north side of his property. "James and I can help with the fences," Nora offered. "He's stronger than he looks, and I'm no stranger to hard work." Virgil raised an eyebrow. "Fence mending isn't exactly Philadelphia ladylike," Nora finished with a wry smile. "Mr. Thomas, I stopped being that woman when I buried my husband. Now I'm just someone trying to build a life for her children, and I'll do whatever that requires." As the day progressed, Virgil found himself impressed by Nora's determination. She worked steadily alongside him, learning quickly and never complaining about the heat or the rough work. James proved eager to help as well, while Elizabeth and Sarah took charge of the chickens and helped prepare the midday meal. By sunset, they'd accomplished more than Virgil had managed alone in a week. As they sat on the porch, watching the children chase fireflies in the gathering dusk, Virgil felt a peculiar contentment settling over him. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You've brought more help than I deserved for a simple act of kindness." Nora glanced at him, her face softened by the fading light. Kindness is never simple, Mr. Thomas, not in a world that often lacks it. Virgil, he corrected gently. If I'm calling you Nora, it's only fair. She nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. Virgil, then, days stretched into a week as they fell into an easy rhythm. Each morning, Nora would rise early to prepare breakfast, then join Virgil in whatever work needed doing. The children formed fast friendships, with James taking a protective attitude toward both younger girls. In the evenings, Nora would tell stories or teach the children games from her childhood, filling the small cabin with more laughter than it had known in years. Virgil found himself watching her often, the way she tucked stray hairs behind her ear as she cooked, how her nose crinkled when she laughed at the children's antics, the quiet competence in her hands as she darned socks or mended shirts without being asked. On the 8th day, Mr. Peterson arrived with the repaired wheel, and Virgil felt an unexpected dread settle in his stomach. Nora thanked the wheelwright profusely and arranged for him to help reattach it to her wagon the following morning. That night, after the children were asleep, Virgil found Nora sitting alone on the porch steps, staring at the star-filled Texas sky. "All packed?" he asked, settling beside her with a respectable distance between them. "Nearly," she replied softly. "The children are reluctant to leave. They've grown fond of this place, and of Sarah. She'll miss them fiercely," Virgil admitted, "and the cabin will seem too quiet without all of you." Nora was silent for a long moment before turning to face him. "Virgil, may I be direct with you?" he nodded, curious at the intensity in her gaze. "These past days have been revealing. I came west seeking security for my children, but I found something unexpected here." She took a deep breath. "Your ranch has potential: good water, decent grazing land. What it lacks are hands to work it and perhaps a different approach." "What are you suggesting?" Virgil asked, his heart beginning to race, though he wasn't sure why. "A partnership of sorts. I have some savings, not much, but enough to buy supplies, maybe some better breeding stock. You have the land and the knowledge. Together, we might make something that could support both our families." She hesitated. "The children are already attached and we work well together. It would be practical." Virgil stared at her, trying to process what she was proposing. "You'd stay here." "But your brother can be written to," she finished. "He offered shelter, not a future. Here I see possibility." Her eyes met his, steady and clear. "I'm not speaking of anything improper, Virgil. Two families sharing resources, helping one another. Though if in time you were to find me agreeable company." Her cheeks flushed slightly in the moonlight. Virgil felt something long dormant stir within him, hope, mixed with a warmth he'd almost forgotten. "I already find you more than agreeable, Nora," he said quietly. "But are you certain? This is a hard life, far from what you've known." "I'm certain only that nothing in life is certain," she replied with a small smile. "But I trust what I've seen in you in this place and in how our children have blossomed together. The rest we can discover as we go." The next morning, Virgil rode with Mr. Peterson back to the stranded wagon. Together, they repaired it and brought it back to the ranch, where Nora and the children waited. But instead of continuing on their journey, they began unloading the Abbott family's belongings into Virgil's cabin. The arrangement they struck was simple. Nora would contribute her savings toward improvements for the ranch, and they would work together as partners in the venture. They would live as two separate families under one roof, maintaining propriety while combining their resources and efforts. Word of their unusual arrangement spread quickly through Cedar Creek. Some whispered disapprovingly about a widow and widower living under the same roof, while others recognized the practical nature of their partnership in the harsh realities of frontier life. Pastor Jenkins visited within the week, ostensibly to welcome Nora to the community, but clearly also to assess the moral standing of the arrangement. Nora met his veiled inquiries with such straightforward dignity that the minister left seemingly satisfied, though he did suggest that church attendance might silence any remaining gossips. As summer progressed into fall, the ranch began to transform. With Nora's savings, They purchased 2 milk cows, better feed for the existing cattle, and supplies to repair the barn properly. Her Eastern education proved unexpectedly valuable as she kept meticulous records of expenses and implemented a more organized approach to the ranch operations. Virgil found himself increasingly drawn to Nora's combination of practical intelligence and warm spirit. She never shied from hard work, but brought a gentle touch to their home that reminded him of what he'd been missing. In the evenings, when the children were asleep, they would often sit together, planning the ranch's future or simply enjoying comfortable silence. By harvest time, their partnership had yielded tangible results. The garden had produced well under Nora's careful tending, providing enough vegetables to preserve for winter. The cattle were healthier, and Virgil had managed to repair most of the neglected infrastructure of the ranch. One crisp October evening, as they sat shelling the last of the season's peas, Nora broached a subject that had been in both their minds. "The children have asked why we don't share a room like their friends' parents," she said quietly, her eyes focused on her task, Virgil's hands stilled. "What did you tell them?" "That sometimes adults need to know each other for a while before making such decisions." She glanced up at him. "It's been nearly 4 months, Virgil. I think we've come to know each other fairly well." He set down the bowl and turned to face her fully. "Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that life is too short and too hard to deny what's growing between us," she replied steadily. "I respect you, Virgil Thomas. I admire your integrity and your devotion to Sarah. And I've come to care for you in a way I didn't expect to feel again after losing Henry." Virgil reached across the table, taking her flour-dusted hand in his. "I've been afraid to speak of it," he admitted. "Afraid you might think I offered help with ulterior motives or that you felt obligated somehow." Nora's laughter was soft but genuine. "You offered help to strangers expecting nothing in return, and I've never felt obligated, challenged perhaps, inspired certainly, but never obligated." "Then," Virgil said, his throat suddenly dry, "would you consider becoming my wife, not just for practicality or the children, but because I've grown to love you, Nora Abbott?" Her eyes glistened in the lamplight. "Yes," she whispered, "for all those reasons, but most especially the last one." They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Cedar Creek, with Sarah, James, and Elizabeth beaming in the front row. Pastor Jenkins spoke of new beginnings and the blessings of blended families, while the small congregation of ranchers, farmers, and townspeople celebrated the union with a community dinner afterward. That night, after the children had fallen asleep, Nora and Virgil stood together in their bedroom. Now truly theirs both suddenly shy despite the months of working side by side. "I never thought I'd have this again," Virgil said softly, taking her hands in his. "A partner, a wife." "Nor I a husband," Nora replied, stepping closer to him. "But here we are, building something new from the ruins of what was lost." Their kiss was gentle at first, then deepened with the months of unspoken longing and growing affection. When they finally separated, both were breathless. "I promise to fill your home with laughter," Nora whispered against his chest. "I intend to keep that promise." "You already have," Virgil assured her, "but I wouldn't mind a lifetime more of it." As winter settled over the Texas plains, the Thomas Abbott household, now simply the Thomas family, faced the season with greater security than Virgil had known in years. The storeroom was stocked with preserved vegetables and smoked meat. The mended barn sheltered healthy livestock, and most importantly, the cabin rang with the sounds of a complete family. Christmas that year was modest in material gifts but rich in meaning. Virgil had carved wooden toys for each of the children, while Nora had sewn new clothes and knitted scarves. The children had made simple presents for each other, and their parents painted stones, woven grass bracelets, and drawings carefully done in precious pencil. As they sat around the fire that night, Nora playing a small harmonica that had been her father's while the children sang carols, Virgil felt a contentment he had almost forgotten was possible. This woman who had appeared in his life by chance or providence had transformed not just his ranch but his heart. The new year brought both challenges and blessings. February saw a week of bitter cold that threatened the cattle, requiring round-the-clock monitoring that left both Virgil and Nora exhausted. But by March, Nora confirmed what she had begun to suspect: she was expecting a child. "Are you happy about it?" she asked Virgil as they walked together through the awakening spring fields. Another mouth to feed, another responsibility. Virgil stopped, turning her to face him. "I'm more than happy," he said firmly. "I'm grateful, for you, for our family, and for this new life." His hand rested gently on her still, flat stomach. "When I shared that last bit of cornbread with Sarah last summer, I never imagined how abundantly we'd be blessed within a year." The pregnancy progressed well through the spring and summer, with Nora maintaining her role in managing the household and garden, though Virgil insisted she leave the heavier ranch work to him and James, who at 11 was growing tall and capable. Elizabeth and Sarah had become inseparable, playing school together and helping with the younger children. Nora sometimes watched for neighboring families to earn extra money. By August, their financial situation had improved enough that Virgil was able to purchase material for Nora to make proper curtains for the cabin windows, and a new dress for herself to accommodate her growing figure. She had insisted that these weren't necessities, but Virgil had been equally insistent that she deserved some comforts. "You've worked as hard as any rancher's wife I've ever known," he told her. "Harder than most, and without complaint. Let me do this small thing." The autumn harvest was bountiful, and as Nora's time grew near, neighbors began stopping by more frequently, bringing gifts for the coming baby and offering help with the heavier household tasks. Virgil was touched by the community's support, recognizing that they had fully accepted Nora and her children as belonging to Cedar Creek now. Samuel Thomas was born on a clear October night with the assistance of Mrs. Hernandez, the closest thing the area had to a midwife. After hours of labor that had Virgil pacing anxiously outside the bedroom door, the lusty cries of a healthy baby boy finally rang through the cabin. When Mrs. Hernandez finally allowed him in, Virgil found Nora propped up in bed, tired but radiant, holding a small bundle wrapped in the special blanket she had spent weeks knitting. "Meet your son," she said softly as Virgil approached with reverent steps. Taking the newborn in his arms, Virgil felt a surge of emotion so powerful it nearly brought him to his knees. The baby's face was red and wrinkled, with a surprising amount of dark hair plastered to his head, but to Virgil, he was perfect, a living symbol of the new life he and Nora had built together. "Samuel," he whispered, testing the name they had chosen. "Welcome to the world, little man. You've got quite a family waiting to meet you." And indeed, once Mrs. Hernandez declared it appropriate, the three older children crowded into the room, their faces alight with wonder at their new brother. James, who had initially been the most reserved about the family merging, seemed particularly moved, reaching out a hesitant finger to touch the baby's tiny hand. "He's so small," the boy marveled, "but he's got a strong grip." "Like his big brother," Virgil said, placing a hand on James's shoulder. Over the past year, he'd worked to build a relationship with Nora's son, recognizing the boy's need for male guidance while respecting that he carried memories of his own father. As winter approached again, the family settled into new routines around the baby. Samuel proved to be a generally content child, though his lusty cries in the night sometimes tested everyone's patience. But even in the most exhausting moments, Virgil would catch Nora's eye across the room, and they would share a smile of deep understanding. This was the life they had chosen, challenges and all. The ranch continued to prosper in small but significant ways. With James's help, Virgil had expanded their cattle herd to 20 head, and they had added a small flock of sheep at Nora's suggestion. The wool would provide another source of income and could be processed at home during the winter months when outdoor work was limited. By spring, they had saved enough to begin construction on an addition to the cabin. The original structure had grown cramped for a family of 6, and Virgil wanted the older children to have proper space of their own. Nothing extravagant, he explained as he and James marked out the foundation. Just 2 more rooms, one for the girls and one for you and eventually Samuel when he's older. My own room, James asked, his eyes widening. He had been sleeping on a pallet in the main living area since they had arrived. You've earned it, Virgil said sincerely. You're becoming a man, James. A man needs his own space to think and grow. The boy straightened his shoulders at these words, pride evident in his face. At 12, he was at that cusp between childhood and adolescence, eager to be taken seriously. I won't let you down, Pa, he said, the term slipping out naturally though he usually called Virgil by his name. Virgil felt his heart swell at the word but kept his response measured, not wanting to embarrass the boy. I know you won't, son. Now let's make sure this corner is square. Building progressed through the summer, with neighbors coming to help raise the walls and roof in exchange for Nora's cooking, and the promise of Virgil's assistance with their own projects. By late August, the addition was complete enough for the children to move into their new spaces, though finishing details would continue through the fall. Life settled into a rhythm that was busy but fulfilling. Sarah and Elizabeth attended the small school in Cedar Creek when it was in session, while James divided his time between schooling and learning the ranching business from Virgil. Nora managed the household, cared for Samuel, and maintained the financial records of their growing enterprise. The ranch, once on the brink of failure, now provided a modest but secure living for the family. They weren't wealthy by any measure, but they no longer feared hunger or losing their home. Each season brought its own challenges and rewards, and they faced them together as a unit. As Samuel's first birthday approached, Nora found Virgil standing by the corral one evening, watching the sunset with a pensive expression. "Deep thoughts?" she asked, slipping her hand into his. "Grateful ones," he replied, squeezing her fingers. "I was remembering that day when all I had to offer Sarah was half a piece of cornbread, how desperate things seemed. And now I have more than I ever dreamed possible." He turned to face her fully. "You kept your promise, Nora. You filled this place with laughter." She smiled, leaning against him. It wasn't hard. There was love here already, it just needed room to grow. They stood together as twilight deepened, watching the stars appear one by one in the vast Texas sky. In the distance, a coyote called, answered by another further away. The ranch building stood solid against the gathering darkness, windows glowing with lamplight where their children waited. "We should go in," Nora said eventually. "I promised the children we'd make plans for Samuel's birthday celebration." Virgil nodded, but held her hand to keep her close a moment longer. "Sometimes I wonder what Mary would think of all this," he admitted quietly, "if she would approve." Nora considered this with the thoughtfulness he'd come to cherish in her. "I believe she would want Sarah to have a mother's love and you to have happiness again," she said finally. "Just as I believe Henry would want James and Elizabeth to have a father's guidance." "You're probably right," Virgil said, beginning to walk with her toward the house. "They'd want their children to thrive, whatever it took." "And they are thriving," Nora pointed out, "all of them." Inside, they found the older children engaged in a spirited game of checkers while Samuel banged enthusiastically on a pot with a wooden spoon, creating what he clearly considered music. "Papa, Mama," Sarah called upon seeing them. "Come see, James is teaching us a new game." Virgil caught Nora's eye as they moved to join their children. The simple word, "us," spoke volumes about how completely their families had merged. Sarah no longer distinguished between herself and her step-siblings. They were simply brothers and sisters now. Samuel's birthday celebration turned into a community affair, with neighboring families bringing small gifts and sharing in a picnic on the ranch grounds. The children organized games, and Mr. Perkins from town brought his fiddle, playing lively tunes that had everyone dancing despite the autumn chill. As evening approached, Virgil found himself standing slightly apart from the festivities, taking in the scene. His property, once lonely and failing, now bustled with life and community. The new addition to the cabin stood solid and welcoming. Healthy livestock grazed in fields that had been properly tended. And at the center of it all was his family, not just the children, but Nora, who had brought order and warmth to every corner of his existence. She caught him watching and made her way to his side, Samuel perched on her hip. The baby reached for Virgil immediately, and he took his son in his arms, feeling the solid weight of him with satisfaction. "Happy?" Nora asked, leaning against his shoulder. "Beyond words," Virgil replied honestly. "I keep thinking I'll wake up and find it was all a dream, the broken wheel, you appearing on the road that day." "Not a dream," she assured him, her hand finding his. "Though sometimes I wonder what would have happened if we'd made it to Petaluma as planned, if we'd never met." Virgil shook his head, unwilling to entertain the thought. "Some things are meant to be, I reckon. That wheel broke for a reason." "Such a philosopher," she teased gently, but her eyes were serious. "I do believe you're right, though. Some paths are laid out for us, if we're brave enough to follow them." The years that followed brought changes both expected and surprising. James grew into a tall young man who showed a particular talent for horse training, eventually starting a small side business breaking and gentling horses for neighboring ranchers. Elizabeth developed her mother's head for figures and helped manage the increasingly complex finances of the ranch. Sarah, to everyone's surprise, revealed an artistic talent, creating detailed drawings of the ranch and its inhabitants that began to sell in the general store in Cedar Creek. Samuel was joined by a sister, Rebecca, when he was 3, and the family was complete. The ranch continued to prosper, not spectacularly but steadily, allowing them to make improvements each year: a proper barn, better fencing, eventually a small second cabin where James could establish his own household when the time came. Through it all, Virgil and Nora's partnership deepened into something neither had experienced in their previous marriages, a relationship of equals built on shared struggle and triumph. They disagreed sometimes, of course. Nora's Eastern practicality occasionally clashed with Virgil's frontier instincts, but they had learned to work through differences with respect and often humor. On their 10th wedding anniversary, the children, now ranging from 7 to 22, conspired to give them a day to themselves, taking over all ranch chores and preparing a special dinner. James, who had recently begun courting the schoolteacher's daughter, arranged for them to have a proper carriage ride around their property, which had expanded to 50 acres over the years. As they rode along the boundaries of their land, Virgil reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. "We built something good here," he said, his arm around Nora's shoulders. At 42, she was still beautiful to him, though silver now threaded through her honey-colored hair and the Texas sun had etched fine lines around her eyes. "We did," she agreed, her head resting comfortably against him, "though I don't think either of us could have done it alone." "I know I couldn't have," Virgil admitted. "I was barely holding on when you found me. When we found each other," she corrected gently. "That's how I've always thought of it, 2 broken families that made something whole together." The carriage passed the original spot where they'd built their first proper cattle pen together, now expanded into a series of well-constructed corrals. Beyond that was the orchard Nora had insisted on planting, their second-year apple and peach trees now tall enough to provide shade and fruit in season. "Do you ever regret it?" Virgil asked suddenly. "Not making it to California, the life you might have had there?" Nora turned to face him fully, her hazel eyes serious. "Not for a single moment," she said firmly. "This was always where I was meant to be, Virgil, with you, with our children, building this life." He kissed her then, still marveling after a decade that this remarkable woman had chosen him, had seen potential in his struggling ranch and his wounded heart. "Remember that cornbread," he murmured when they separated. the last bit I had to share with Sarah." Nora nodded, her eyes soft with understanding of why this memory remained so significant to him. "I thought it represented the end of something," Virgil continued. "The last of our resources, maybe the end of my dream for this place, but it was really the beginning." "The darkest moment comes just before dawn," Nora quoted softly. "My mother used to say that." "Your mother was a wise woman," Virgil replied, "to raise a daughter like you." They completed their tour of the property as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the Texas sky in spectacular oranges and pinks. The ranch buildings stood silhouetted against the colorful backdrop, solid, enduring symbols of what they had created together. As they approached the main house, now expanded and improved over the years, they could see their children waiting on the porch. Samuel was balanced on James's shoulders, while Rebecca tugged at Elizabeth's skirts. Sarah stood slightly apart, sketching the scene with the practiced ease of her developing talent. "Look at them," Nora whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Our legacy." Virgil helped her down from the carriage, then stood for a moment, his arm around his wife as they took in the tableau before them. The house that had once echoed with lonely silence now burst with life and laughter, just as Nora had promised that night on his porch when she'd decided to stay. "Not bad for a rancher who once had nothing but half a loaf to share," he said softly. "Not bad at all," Nora agreed, leaning into him with the comfortable familiarity of a decade's partnership. "But then, I always knew you had more to offer than you realized." "And I always knew you were the wisest woman in Texas," Virgil replied, pressing a kiss to her temple before they walked together toward their waiting family and all the laughter, challenges, and joy that lay ahead. As the years continued their relentless march, the Thomas Ranch became a fixture in the Cedar Creek community, not the largest or most prosperous operation, but one known for its resilience and the warm welcome always offered at its gate. Travelers passing through, much like Nora and her children had once been, frequently found themselves invited to share a meal or stay the night in the small guest cabin that had been James's first independent building project. The children grew and began to forge their own paths. James, at 25, married Lucy Hendricks, the schoolteacher's daughter, and built a home on the eastern edge of the Thomas property. His horse training business had grown into a respectable enterprise, attracting clients from as far as San Antonio. Elizabeth, always the most academically inclined, surprised everyone by accepting a position as a bookkeeper at the newly established bank in Cedar Creek, becoming one of the first women in the area to hold such a role. Sarah, now 19 and blossoming into a young woman who combined her mother's gentle spirit with Nora's practical determination, had developed her artistic talents into a modest career. Her detailed illustrations of Texas flora and fauna had caught the attention of a naturalist passing through the area, who commissioned her to contribute to a book he was compiling. The project required her to travel to Austin occasionally, trips that both worried and filled Virgil with pride. Samuel, at 15, showed every sign of becoming a cattleman like his father, with an intuitive understanding of the animals and the land that sometimes surpassed even Virgil's experience. And little Rebecca, no longer so little at 12, revealed a gift for storytelling that entertained the family through long winter evenings. Nora and Virgil watched their children's development with the bittersweet awareness that comes to all parents' pride in their growth, mingled with nostalgia for the days when small hands had reached for theirs with complete trust. But they found new joy in their expanding family, especially when James and Lucy welcomed twin boys, making Virgil and Nora grandparents at an age when they still felt too young for the title. "Grandpa Virgil," Nora teased as they walked home from their first visit to see the newborns. "It suits you somehow. Better than old man Thomas, I suppose," he replied with mock gruffness that didn't hide the emotion in his eyes, "though I'm not sure how I feel about being old enough to have grandsons." "You're not old," Nora assured him, slipping her arm through his. "Just seasoned. Like good leather." Their laughter echoed across the fields they had tended together for 15 years now, fields that had responded to their care by producing ever more abundant harvests. The ranch had grown to 75 acres, with a herd of 40 cattle, a flourishing vegetable garden that supplied not only their family, but provided extra produce to sell in town, and an orchard that produced enough fruit for preserves that had become Nora's specialty at the county fair. Life wasn't without its hardships, of course. A particularly brutal winter 3 years earlier had claimed several valuable animals despite their best efforts. Drought was an ever-present threat in Texas, requiring constant vigilance and planning. And the normal wear of aging bodies sometimes made the physical labor of ranch life more challenging than it had been in earlier years. But through it all, Virgil and Nora faced each challenge together, their partnership deepened by the years of shared struggle and joy. They had learned each other's strengths and weaknesses, developed a language of looks and touches that often made words unnecessary, and built a love that had expanded to embrace not just each other, but the family and community around them. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching a spectacular sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Virgil reached over and took Nora's hand, his thumb tracing the calluses that told the story of their years of shared work. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice thoughtful. "A dangerous pastime," Nora teased, the familiar joke between them bringing a smile to both their faces. "I've been thinking," he continued, "about that first night you stayed here. Do you remember what you said to me?" Nora's brow furrowed slightly as she searched her memory. "I said many things, I'm sure, that I'd earn our keep, that your ranch had potential. You promised to fill my home with laughter," Virgil reminded her softly. "Those were your exact words," understanding dawned in her eyes, "and you're wondering if I kept that promise." "No," he said, squeezing her hand. "I'm marveling at how completely you fulfilled it, beyond anything I could have imagined that day." Nora leaned against his shoulder, her body fitting against his with the comfortable familiarity of long partnership. "It wasn't just me, Virgil. You had to be willing to open your heart again, to take a chance on us." "Best chance I ever took," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Sometimes I think about how close we came to never meeting, if your wheel hadn't broken, if I'd taken a different route that day." "But it did, and you didn't," she pointed out practically. "And here we are." They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. From inside the house came the sounds of Rebecca practicing her recitation for the school pageant, her clear young voice rising and falling with dramatic emphasis. "I've been thinking too," Nora said eventually, "about leaving something permanent behind, something more than just memories." Virgil looked at her curiously. "The ranch will go to the children, the house, the land that's our legacy." "I was thinking of something else," she explained, "a record of sorts, of how we came to be a family, of the struggles and joys along the way." "Like Sarah's drawings?" Virgil asked. "More like a written account. I've kept journals all these years." Nora hesitated, suddenly shy. "I thought perhaps we could compile them somehow with Sarah's illustrations into a proper book, for the grandchildren and their children after them." Virgil considered this, touched by the idea. "Our story isn't anything special," he said modestly, "just ordinary folks making a life." "That's precisely what makes it valuable," Nora insisted. "It's the story of how love and determination can build something lasting from almost nothing, how two broken families found wholeness together." She smiled up at him. "And it all started with a shared piece of cornbread." "When you put it that way," Virgil conceded, "it does sound worth preserving." They began the project that winter, spending the long evenings sorting through Nora's journals and Virgil's sparse but detailed ranch records. Sarah enthusiastically agreed to contribute illustrations, and even Elizabeth offered to help organize the material into a coherent narrative. It became a family endeavor, with each member contributing memories and perspectives. The resulting volume, bound in leather by the saddle maker in Cedar Creek, was completed the following summer. They titled it simply The Thomas Family, a history, with the years 1878-1893 inscribed beneath. Inside, Nora had written a dedication, "For those who come after, that they might know how much can grow from the smallest seed of kindness." As the century drew to a close, the Thomas Ranch stood as testament to what persistence, partnership, and love could accomplish. The original small cabin, now serving as a storehouse, remained as a reminder of their humble beginnings. The main house, expanded and improved over the years, had become a gathering place not just for their immediate family, but for friends and neighbors as well. After the evening meal, as they all sat around the large fireplace that Virgil and James had built 5 years earlier, Samuel raised a question that seemed to capture the reflective mood of the occasion. "Pa, Ma," he asked, using the names he had called them since he could speak, "if you could go back and change anything about your lives together, would you?" Virgil and Nora exchanged a glance, their eyes meeting with the deep understanding that comes from decades of shared life. "Not a single day," Virgil answered first, "though I might have fixed that north fence a year earlier and saved myself some chasing after strays." The family laughed, but Samuel persisted. "I'm serious, no regrets, no paths not taken that you wish you had." Nora considered the question thoughtfully. "I sometimes wonder what would have happened if we'd continued to California as planned," she admitted. "But that's not the same as wishing we had. Every choice closes some doors and opens others. The doors that opened for us here," she gestured to the family gathered around them, "have led to more joy than I could have imagined that day on the trail." "But it wasn't always easy," Elizabeth pointed out. "I remember some pretty lean times, especially in the beginning." "Life isn't meant to be easy," Virgil said simply. "It's meant to be lived fully. The struggles make the good times sweeter." James, who had been listening quietly, raised his glass of cider. "To the broken wheel," he proposed, "the best accident that ever happened to this family." They all drank to that, even the children with their cups of watered cider, and the conversation turned to plans and hopes for the coming new century. As the evening wore on, the younger children fell asleep by the fire, and the adults' talk grew more reflective. When most of the family had retired to bed, some to rooms in the main house, others to James's home, or the guest cabin, Virgil and Nora found themselves alone by the dying fire. 21 years, Virgil mused, his arm around his wife's shoulders, since that day on the trail. 21 years, Nora echoed softly. "A lifetime, the best lifetime," he amended, pulling her closer, "because I've shared it with you." Outside, a light snow began to fall, rare for Texas, but not unheard of. They watched through the window as the flakes drifted down, transforming the familiar landscape into something magical and new. "It will be a different world for our grandchildren," Nora said, thinking of the changes they had already witnessed in their lifetime, the coming of the railroad to areas once isolated, the telegraph connecting distant places, the gradual taming of what had once been wild frontier. "Different, yes," Virgil agreed, "but some things never change: the need for home, for family, for love, for laughter," Nora added with a smile. "Especially for laughter," Virgil confirmed, kissing her gently. "The promise that saved us both." As they prepared for bed, moving through the familiar routine of banking the fire and checking that all was secure for the night, they did so with the comfortable synchronicity of two people who had built a life in perfect tandem. Their steps matched, their hands found each other without looking, their breath fell into the same rhythm. And in the quiet of their bedroom, with moonlight filtering through the curtains, Nora had made so many years ago and replaced several times since, they held each other close, grateful for the broken wheel that had led Nora Abbott to the struggling ranch of Virgil Thomas, and for the courage they had both found to begin again, together. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the Texas landscape in a gentle blanket of white, transforming everything it touched, while the essence remained unchanged beneath. Like love itself, coming unexpectedly to transform lives while revealing the true nature that had always waited to be discovered. In the Thomas household, the laughter that had once been a promise had become the foundation upon which everything else was built: a home, a family, a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. A half loaf of cornbread, shared in desperate times, had somehow multiplied into a feast of life abundant enough to nourish generations to come. And as they drifted toward sleep in each other's arms, Virgil and Nora carried with them the profound awareness that sometimes life's greatest gifts come disguised as misfortunes, and that the journey matters far more than the destination. Their broken wheel had led them home, not to the place they had planned to reach, but to the one they were always meant to find.